Oh yeah. Dagi Chenye Gibe Sanangi Dola Benche Sangye Durva Shu.
कैसा थे Jampa those things. Jampa Srati, Jampa Sangye, Jampa Siti, Che, Lobsang, this Kunphen, Ling, Theg, Theg, śāstra, dKon chana, tiba sunda, tiba sundi kansa, nangshuba sunche, sun tiba sundi ji, nangshuba sunche. Ini mega mega sunche, mega nangche. Ani devi kesu nama shabadis, kesu.
So, returning to the topic of the three Ratnams as the object of refuge, specifically the verse 19. The teacher is a reference to the Buddha Ratna, the teaching to the Dharma Ratna, and then the disciples to the Sangha Ratna, in the sense of being. So the Buddha Ratna is the object of refuge in the sense of being the teacher, the Dharma in the sense of being the teaching, and the Sangha in the sense of being the practitioners. Then the act of refuge is referred to in this verse in terms of how it is carried out by the followers of each of the three vehicles, meaning that the Mahayanas primarily take refuge in the Buddha Ratna as the result form of the object of refuge. The Pratyeka Buddhas take refuge primarily in the Dharma Ratna as their result form of taking refuge. And listeners do so in relation to the Sangha Ratna. Then it also says, let's see, and with regard to those who carry out specific kinds of religious practice, or who are devoted to carrying out specific kinds of religious practice, and that is how various individuals of different dispositions, but who have not yet entered the path, take refuge in the three Ratnas, primarily in terms of the devotional activities that they carry out.
TJ Damudi Kurdish, the correctness, Jampa looking to the city. Kurdish, Kurdish, only proofing, schedule proofing, Kundusumbi, Kibasumbi, Jampa, Kibasumbi, Kibasumbi, 니 유익적수 똑같이 치. 시 되는 경기 체스 되는 세 그 정시에 제격지 제격수 온도제나 니 라는 겹선가 하는 샤브레스 레티잖아. 이 온도 유익적 온도제나 송계에 군조순간 겹수 리스타티
So, as was discussed yesterday, regarding the two kinds of taking refuge in a causal way is indicated. One way I think of the verse is that, so why are there three ratnas? What are the purposes of each of the ratnas? What is their special role and function? So the description of the Buddha Dharma Ratna as the teacher, the teaching, and the practitioners, in that sense, as the teacher, the Dharma as the teaching, and the Sangha as the practitioners, in that manner or in that capacity, is an indication that all practitioners of all three vehicles, in all three ratnas, when they take the causal form of taking refuge. The causal form of taking refuge is mainly described as the form of refuge in which you regard each of these three objects as either a being or spiritual qualities that are possessed by others, other than yourself. And so they are the goal that you seek, in the sense that the Buddha is someone who has attained enlightenment, the Dharma represents the qualities that you want to attain, and the Sangha are those who already possess those qualities. And thinking of them in that term, then you take refuge in those qualities as they already exist in others. So that's one sense of how the three ratnas are to be understood as an object of refuge. Then the second way is Jajadi Rereviti. But when you're thinking, when you're explaining the act of refuge in the way of being from the point of view of a result, it means that you think of one ratnas in particular as your principal goal, and you take refuge in that goal that you intend to achieve for yourself in the future. So when you take refuge in the Buddha Ratna as a Mahayanist, you take refuge in the Buddhahood that you seek for yourself as your ultimate goal. And if you are a Pratika Buddha practitioner, as was explained yesterday, you look at the Dharma Ratna as that goal that you are taking refuge in. And the followers of the listeners people, similarly in the Sangha. So it means each one represents the principal goal that the practitioner seeks, and in that sense, those practitioners take refuge in each one of those objects separately and individually as their principal goal that they seek for themselves. Another way in which the three ratnas represent objects of refuge.
Dati, tangan handugi Gyumed handu Gyumed sumbat kana tajab tambati Gyumed sanje tije Gyumed sanje gi mananzola lamte otane sanje kurang gi shane sanje junde de tam umbato sanje teaching Pandovi in the Pandovi in the Yamsanambala Tenia Asashi Pabekasa Mapuchunera, but to soon can get Higger. He kept the lieutenant, Tanganazui, Neil Lambda Tingi Lunes, Sandy Kobato, this, Tomati, very captured. He did find the invented to sue the ritual. And indeed, generous. Yeah, public independent to do and Lam Yang is Lam Yang Solam, public assault. The public assault and Bolami. In a sandy for Vantura, those ones will give you get public assault to be in December. Okay. Up and could have said, only terms story into the quality of the Sutra. Then, going to need to tattoo scandal and Jebikers. They just said. Around the Jundur, kept some good.
Jungur.
I'm going to get a church head and Jenny Jabalatene, Ringi Tonam Neachi, Jonam to Tom to Yid, and I'm just looking to go to you could teach you that one of the children. In a such a Ringi after Sandy all those kind of duty. She knew the truth in the university. They retailers. She knew the truth in the other day. I knew the June we kept some good. They just said this is
it is a point that Rinpoche is describing the distinction between these two types of virtue again. Sometimes it's difficult to really the distinction to sink in. It's actually has a psychological dimension to it. For instance, we think of Buddha Shakyamuni as a Buddha, the Buddha whose teaching is currently still present in the world. He being a enlightened one that has a historical example of someone who attained enlightenment. Someone other than ourselves. The Dharma which he taught subsequent to his enlightenment, we can think of the Dharma Ratna that way, or we can think of it as the qualities of realization that exist in the Buddha's mind, as well as in the minds of his followers who achieved the state of transcendent path as being the Dharma Ratna that exists in the minds of others, what that represents. And then similarly, then his followers who have attained the transcendent path as the Sangha Ratna. And so then the act of taking refuge is in which we see ourselves as being in need of refuge. And so that we are, in a sense, helpless. And so we're looking to these three entities as a means to gain the refuge that we do not possess. This is one way of thinking of refuge. So you take refuge in these three entities. In that way, that's the causal form of taking refuge. Then there's another way, which is considered superior, considered more knowledgeable, you can say, more skillful, is to think of Buddhahood as the goal that once you attain it, will represent your safety, your refuge. Once you possess in your mind the qualities of truth of cessation and the truth of the path, which the Buddha possesses in its consummate form and which the Aryas also possess by virtue of their having attained transcendent realization. Then you will have yourself that's refuge that you seek. So it's kind of a different way of thinking of the pursuit of refuge. One is thinking of source from which you will gain it. The other is looking at the refuge itself that you seek as the thing that you are taking refuge in. So, as Mahāyānas, the future enlightenment that we seek is which is represented by the Buddha Ratna. Then we achieve that gradually. We don't bypass the Sangha Ratna in that process. First, we have to become beings who have attained some freedom from samsara by achieving the first level of the transcendent path, and then in that capacity have actually achieved the Dharma Ratna in our own minds, and then gradually, as we progress up the spiritual ladder, so to speak, when we reach the 10th stage, then we're near to the ultimate goal of Buddhahood itself. And if we are aware of, to the extent to however much we are aware of what that process is, how to go about it, in what sense we need to practice to bring that about, and then we take refuge in the possibility of our own attainment of that, where the focus is on our own capacity to achieve it and our own beneath to make efforts to gain it. And that represents the actual refuge, then that constitutes a different mode, so to speak, of taking refuge, which is referred to as the result form of taking refuge, meaning thinking of taking refuge in that state, that future state of the Ratnas, which you intend to achieve.
That's me. And just the decoration and I get to Captain Bob teaching. Captain Bob teaching. I mean, really soon they check it. You teach anything to Buddha. I kept the book. Asanga gives come to Jati. Easy Jati. So I kept the book long about the Sunday in the Egypt. Dig around it. I'm tension to here. Shadju young and Chigrava. Nimena Captain Boba Sangel of Bay, long ever G. Nana. He soon elected young son Marva. What is a time Captain Bobu is young. Sangel Tibasunge Kansa Kandu, he can do the channel. I get it to his Carson. Captain Lobo Sange. Sange the Captain Lobo, Ziba Shadaris. 최대 경우는 이제 chen dbye sierra gyumed dKon to the Tantra in the chen dbye sierra the sunga chen
As for the act itself of taking refuge, a mental act, then the crucial factor one must have in order to carry the act out properly is to have a particular kind of faith. Then this faith is called the word for it is belief. Actually, it's not belief in a or fuzzy sense. It is a particular kind of conviction that comes from understanding that kind of faith. There are maybe three kinds of faith. This is one of them. So to develop that kind of faith, one has to have an understanding of, especially among the three Ratnas, this kind of faith towards the Buddha. Then, as was mentioned, one regards the Buddha as the one who reveals the refuge, reveals the means of gaining refuge, Jampa, the one who teaches that which is the refuge. And so what that word implies is that one regards him, a Buddha, enlightenment, as being an infallible source of that doctrine. So one that requires some understanding and reflection on our own part to develop that kind of understanding that leads to a kind of faith that is a form of conviction. That this is the Tibetan word is faith, yijit. So that type of faith, that sense of certainty about the infallibility of the Buddha and being unique in that way is essential for taking refuge properly. The other two Ratnas will flow from that. Faith in the other two Ratnas will flow from that. If you believe that the Buddha is the infallible teacher, then you will automatically then regard his teaching as worthy instruction to follow, and you will in fact want to follow it and will follow it. And similarly, you will regard those practitioners who have attained a level of realization as a genuine means of assistance in your own spiritual pursuit. So that's true for all three vehicles, followers of all three vehicles. So that quality is mostly relating to the causal form of taking refuge. All followers of all three vehicles view the Buddha Ratna as the teacher of the refuge, the Dharma Ratna as the actual refuge, and the Sangha Ratna as those who are assisting us, supporting us, helping to guide us. But the way that we develop that faith that's necessary for the act of refuge is mainly focused on understanding what Buddhahood is and developing the proper form of faith.
Sangye captain babos, Chukan Nurse, Sangye Gang, Jindu, the Gamma Del Mari. Community churches, and Jindu and Sangye, Kamuna Maris, Yamari. The community also, Lanich and community, and the church. Then I jumped to the landed, switching to somebody, and soon they get the Jampa Sangye, young net Martin Shabbat. Around the Lananos, she had the church. I did attending most yet. 수리 델러지기에는 추위증 장르들한테 주의식을 상담했더니 내 사람들 내손 교화치고 내손 교화지 장르들한테 주의식을 상담했더니 윤기열봐 인상 최경은 시야대 무엇을 저렇게 진행들이 있어 상계가 기술적만 인데만 있어.
So when it is said that the Dharma Ratna is the actual refuge, this doesn't mean that the Buddha Ratna and the Sangha Ratna aren't legitimately objects in which to take refuge. What it means is that for ourselves, the refuge that we seek, the refuge that we need, that we are aspiring to, is gained directly through the Dharma. When the Buddhas teach, when the Sanghas assist, then the main activity that brings about refuge for us is for us to practice the Dharma. When we practice it in such a way that we develop within ourselves qualities that it brings, then we achieve the refuge that we seek. So for instance, the most basic form of refuge is represented by the Dharma of practicing a lifestyle and a form of conduct that abides by the principles of karma, avoiding non-virtuous deeds and cultivating virtuous ones. And that form of the Dharma, that is being able to actually carry out one's own conduct in accordance with those principles, brings us a form of refuge. It protects us. It frees us from the peril of falling into the lower realms. And so that is a way in which the Dharma acts as the actual or direct refuge. So when the term actual refuge is referring to refuge, achieving the object of our act of taking refuge through our own practice of the Dharma. So to further clarify this point, and even the act of taking refuge, which is something that can be done repeatedly, one instance of reciting or not reciting the formula for taking refuge, but generating the mind of taking refuge. That state of mind in your own mind. And that is an act or an instance of taking refuge. And each time and each individual instance of that act alone has a beneficial effect. It will bring you countless, or Bhaktunema means an incalculably, inconceivably great amount of virtue. And at the same time, it will also purify you of bad deeds. That quality of purifying your bad deeds, in particular, if you consider that alone or specifically, then the nature of bad deeds, non-virtuous karma, evil deeds, sins even, those entities in our mental continuum, that they have their function, their power is to, when they ripen, one form of karmic result is the maturation result. The maturation result of karma means determining what sort of future rebirth you take. The only kind of maturation result that bad deeds bring in the lower realms. So if each time that you take refuge, you purify a significant number of the causes that have the ability to produce your rebirth in the lower realms, then that is a form of refuge that you gain by virtue of the act of taking refuge, even. Even more so, if you generate the mind of bodhicitta. And these are, I don't want to digress. Bodhicitta, similarly, bodhicitta in particular has tremendous ability to purify one's bad deeds. That point has been heard before. So we have the ability to put into practice the Dharma, that form of Dharma, in which we learn the instruction and then we cultivate it and we develop it. And as we do so, then in fact, one kind of immediate benefit, one immediate result that we get from that is the refuge of having eliminated the karma, the bad karma, that would ensure our rebirth in the lower realms in our next life or in other future lives. So in that sense, the Dharma Ratna in particular, we can derive the refuge that it has the potential to provide right now. We do not have to think of the Dharma Ratna as some great faraway state of realization that may or may not be within our grasp. This point was made in an earlier class. Here it's being made again.
최근 저세들 이같이 통부터 내려는 잔주기생 잠바다 인지다 무슨 최근적인 원중한 시장에 되게 라인을 두스나 아니 최근적 최근적인 되게 고심이 되는 제비 이 랑게는 간거로 최근적 세트 로스지 이게 부디티샤에서 지금 내가제 최근적 하고 이제 최근적 안내제나 아니 인지 양내제나 잠바 양내제나 잠바 인지군 아니 잠바더니 공부를 배워봐도 내가 재산 아니 배워봐도 내가 여기서 아니 일단 오늘은 뭐 수정이 뒤인 거예요. 주도수인 거예요. 난 그랬지 먼저에 도수량에 맞지는 언제 줘야 내버려. 자기 마음도 전타를 내는 좀 돼야 되면 안 되냐면 맞지 이 레벨가 어디에 산다 어디서 중요한 주근조세 도수인 거예요. 주근조 작용은 있어야 도수 어디서
So this point is one that relates specifically to that phrase in which the Dharma is described as the actual refuge, or the direct refuge, meaning that when we think of the Dharma Ratna as an object to take refuge in, it's not only those very exalted spiritual levels of realization that we may be far from achieving. We do not have to think of the Dharma Ratna only in those terms. For us, especially, the Dharma Ratna is those forms of practice, of spiritual practice, of an overall system, which brings about ultimately the final attainment, but which has a starting point that meets us wherever we are, starting with the practice of finding and cultivating a proper relationship with a spiritual teacher. There. And the point of it, all of these instructions are part of the Dharma which the Buddha has taught. And to say that the Dharma is the actual refuge means that it is a very real form of protection that can be gained at all levels of one's spiritual development, but will only be gained if and when we choose to adopt those practices which we are capable of practicing and in fact undertake that effort. Then that effort of developing the understanding and the spiritual minds that those instructions are meant to generate, then by availing ourselves of that, we are gaining refuge. We are achieving the refuge that the Dharma Ratna represents. So we do not need to think in massive temples somewhere there in the back of front of the temple, may or may not be accessible to us. We see all these scriptures wrapped up in attractive brocade. We don't need to think that and that alone is the Dharma Ratna, something inaccessible to us.
근데 원함이 세대 조금도 시야야 돼. 그 등에 답변을 드리게 남대는 고생이 있어. 그 등에 겹치. 아니 남대는 고생 시야 되게. 나도 아니 손에 겹치 줬어. 남대 인구비야.
So another way to put it, or another way to sort of tie it in with the discussion in this treatise, as was noted, then the Dharma Ratna in its true sense is the truth of the path and the truth of cessation. And the Dharma Ratna is defined in those terms because it is only by achieving the transcendent path, represented by the truth of the path, that we can gain those forms of cessation that represent an irreversible freeing permanent freedom from the suffering of samsaric existence and all the other obstacles that hinder us from achieving the ultimate goals as well. So for identifying them as the Dharma Ratna. However, so that is a form of refuge that is unique in that it is a permanent kind of freedom in an ultimate sense from all the suffering of samsara and all the other obstacles that lie between us and enlightenment. But there are other forms of refuge that the Dharma can provide. So even though the refuge of freeing ourselves from the lower realm suffering is a temporary refuge and one that is not to be taken as our ultimate goal, nevertheless, it is very real and it is very worthwhile. And it is achieved by practicing forms of Dharma that are certainly within our ability. So in the case of bodhicitta, then the main spiritual qualities that allow us to generate that mind are identified as loving kindness and compassion. And those two minds themselves are described in the scriptures as having wonderful benefits, extraordinary benefits. Those benefits are the kind of benefits that free us from those things that are for us. So things from which we wish to be freed. They provide a kind of refuge. And so we should recognize them as such. And so reading from the text that Rinpoche cited previously as well, the commentary to the Yurkum Mombo, the early Kadampa text by that represents the way in which Bodhisattva taught the Laman. And this is this commentary is by Kidruch's younger brother, Basatri Gensen, several hundred years later, a commentary on the root text, the verses. And he was talking in particular about the Kibuchungu means the practices for a person of lesser abilities, Kibujing, a person of middling abilities. The person of lesser abilities, those instructions culminate with the act of refuge, and then following that, developing a practice that conforms to the teachings of karma. So the key phrase that relates to practice conforming to karma is called Migetsu Bonki Sutra. Migetsu means the 10 non-physical deeds, 3 physical, 4 verbal, 3 mental misdeeds. Migetsu Bong means to abandon them, to avoid them, to resist them. And then Sutra means the morality which consists of doing that. So by definition, it means those situations that present the opportunity or the possibility of engaging in those kinds of misdeeds. When you confront them, then in fact to make the conscious effort to not engage in them. And that avoidance of those deeds, which even when we encounter such situations, represents the virtuous counterparts of those deeds. So the 10 virtuous deeds are defined in terms of the conscious effort to avoid engaging in the non-virtuous deeds whenever those opportunities arise. So in order to do that, we have to reflect on karma. So we have to think about karma. We have to understand, we have to be able to identify what represents those deeds, how they occur, what motivates them in our own minds, and then to be able to recognize them in our everyday life when those situations occur, and then have the wherewithal, the clarity of mind, and the discipline to resist those impulses. So doing that, carrying out that act, that form of practice, that form of morality, represents the form of refuge that frees us, that saves us from falling into the lower realms. So he describes this in this commentary. So we should think of that kind of practice. It's not just knowing what the scriptures say about karma and being able to repeat them, but it means internalizing them and living up to that understanding once we achieve it. If we do that, then we achieve a form of refuge. We, in fact, protect ourselves from a peril, a samsaric danger. In order to protect ourselves from samsara's, all of samsara's suffering, then the phrase is to reflect on the Four Noble Truths. So we all may have some understanding of what the words, the Four Noble Truths, means. But to say that we know what the Noble Truth of suffering is alone that does not really represent a means of refuge. So it has to be a form of reflection that understands the significance of the instruction in such a way that it affects our minds and we change, we put into practice what those instructions urge. So we need to understand suffering as suffering. It's what needs to be realized. We have to see it as something that is undesirable and recognize it as that. And then we have to understand the truth of origination as the cause of that suffering, and therefore what we need to rid ourselves of within ourselves, from within ourselves, and then to recognize that is the means of eradicating those causes permanently. So that kind of understanding of that entire system that is encompassed in the teaching on the Four Noble Truths. Having that understanding and being motivated by it appropriately, and then living by those principles, then that represents a way to gain the refuge that is associated with the teachings for the persons of middling capacity.
합시 순주 공배 지시지발이 없어. 나스네 합시 순지 시베 시르네 시스. 돈이 시르티 시베 지발이 기비야리. 자주 생기 시달이 좁지게. 시베 지발 시달이 좁지게. 저선 시베 시르네 시 인지 시르네 시. 어디에서 탑시 순주 공배 탑시 순주 공수나 세시지가 탐지배 좀 돌아 동리당 생기부지 공부위에 겁나 아니 세시지가 탐지를 교육위에
And then he says about the Mahayana, uniquely Mahayana elements of the Lama instruction, that those instructions, practicing those instructions, then save us from the two extremes, the extreme of samsaric existence, falling into that extreme, and the extreme of the quiescence of Hinayana Nirvana, falling into that extreme. Sishitale Gyo means to save us from those perils. Sometimes Sishijipa is same way. Sishita means those extremes. Extreme meaning something that is like a precipice that one can fall over. So that is described in this commentary by the phrase Tabshish Sungju Gomba. Tab means, especially Bodhicitta, and she is short for Shira, wisdom, and the wisdom that perceives emptiness, understands emptiness correctly. Sungju means to practice them in combination, to practice them jointly, to practice them in a united way, together. Gomba means then to cultivate them or meditate on them, practice them in such a way. Then that form of practice will free you, save you, protect you, give you refuge from those two extremes. And compassion and bodhicitta save you from the peril and the extreme of Hinayana, peace. And then wisdom that perceives emptiness saves you from continued suffering in samsara. And practicing them at the same time saves you from both of them as you do so.
그래서 그래. 컨센서스는 멤버 유승이 주의적다. 대격이가 두분이 스승아. Daycare where he any correspondent. So, champion in the English, daycare set. Any two, any Jesse Jugal level, another answer. Any futures, Louis Sesuma. That the Kessan Digi loving Loma. Any correspondent. Any my man.
Don't you think?
I love it. Look at them soon. What is it? Look at it soon. Tina, Carson, Kitchen. Chandu send a person to a sheet of needs. Mother. Also, I see Javatan, Chandu the same Javatan. Melanka Javan, 20 days. What a Jandu Seatan. Chandu to the same Seatan. Melanka Javan, 20 days, 20 years soon. Still, related to the Rocky and the
So also yesterday, it was pointed out, explained that the two forms of bodhicitta, wishing bodhicitta and active bodhicitta, contain the act of refuge in them implicitly. So both of them have as their aim the attainment of Buddhahood. You seek Buddhahood by virtue of having bodhicitta, and that aspiration to achieve Buddhahood, then that represents the result form of taking refuge, that is your own enlightenment. Then in connection with bodhicitta, especially the active form of bodhicitta, when you carry out the bodhisattva activities of the paramitas, then you are engaging in the causal form, the means of gaining that goal. So that represents the causal aspect of taking refuge. You place your trust in the fact that those activities will be efficacious in bringing about that goal that you seek. That example was put forward yesterday. Another one saying a similar thing is found in a treatise by Vasubandhu's, one of Vasubandhu's considered his disciple. He wrote in a sub-commentary to the Sutra, Mahayana Sutra Alankara. Vasubandhu wrote a commentary to it, and Siddhamati wrote a sub-commentary to Vasubandhu's text. And in that, he says that taking refuge, especially the Mahayana form of taking refuge, and the Bodhisattva mind, Bodhisattva bodhicitta, Bodhisattva attitude, and the activity of generating aspirational prayers, the conviction and the aspiration to bring about and to attain worthy Mahayana goals, to be strongly, to have strong determination. Those three activities, refuge, bodhicitta, and aspirational prayers, are in fact synonymous in their essential nature.
우주 산지 고반 토베쇼스는 답이에요. 잔주선 안들 레비감도 가게이 말이에요. 어디서
So when we form in our mind the intention to achieve enlightenment, or we recite the words to that effect with the appropriate attitude, then we're taking refuge in the ultimate goal. We are developing bodhicitta, and that aspiration itself is a genuine form of aspirational prayer.
네, 로빈 바우기, 파지주가래, 선제라, 인재신, 대시윤대 토면은 대시시바 탐자가 도주적 수행스, 특히 선제라 인재신, 아니 대시윤대 토면은 자주도 생각해봐. 선제라 인지치고 그냥 자주 그렇게 고바 산지주 고바 tum들나 아니 산지를 겹수송이 있습니다. 어디
And repeating the point that was made yesterday from a verse in Arya Shura's Indian poet Arya Shura's poem summary of the Paramitas. He says a verse to the effect that having compassion, feeling compassion towards sentient beings in combination with the aspiration to attain the spiritual qualities of a sugata, that is in essence the act of taking refuge. So, in fact, the previous line, not only taking refuge, but taking refuge in the Buddha, then says if you purify or if you practice the mind of compassion towards other beings, towards others, if you cultivate compassion towards others, then that is in fact taking refuge in the Dharma realm. So the way to understand that is the compassion itself represents the Dharma Ratna. And the fact that you're practicing it implies that you have the kind of faith and conviction and trust in that form of practice and in that mind that represents the act of taking refuge.
That's it. Then you get some said it. Get each other look and you get some said, get some roses, some said it. Get the car look at it. No, you look at it. Then can you what is get some roses and get some said it. When a children get some in Chingunga. In Chingunga, Chesuna, in Chingunga. Loti, Nindi Chingula, Yes, what way?
Yes.
Did yes, and Ichi the Yams number Tilletta. Just and just Rosie.
So the act of refuge, the language that's used to describe that act uses a verb, the simple verb to go, and it uses an object, which is the noun, a refuge, to go for refuge. And so that speed or is not a physical movement, it is a mental motion in the sense of coming nearer to the Dharma, in the case of taking refuge in the Dharma. And when you practice spiritual instruction and you develop the attitudes and realizations that are implicit in those instructions, then you are coming closer. You're drawing nearer to them. And what motivates you to do that, what impels you, is your faith, your trust, your belief that doing so is worthwhile. And so in that sense, practicing the Dharma constitutes taking refuge in So the act is going for refuge in the Dharma, in the practice, in developing those spiritual attitudes. The refuge itself that is gained by doing so is the protection, the freeing yourself from various kinds of suffering. And the suffering, the main cause of suffering is the mental afflictions. Afflictions that produce non-virtuous deeds, for instance. So when you take refuge, when you practice the Dharma, it has the secondary effect of purifying bad seeds of bad deeds that you accumulated in the past, and thereby nullifying their ability to force you to be reborn in the lower realms. And so by virtue of engaging in those kinds of practices that were described, then you will attain the refuge of freeing yourself from that unwanted consequence. So there actually are two principal causes for taking refuge. And the cause that relates to the objects in which we take refuge is faith, that particular kind of faith that is conviction in the benefits gained from the object of refuge. The second kind of cause is one that relates to ourselves, which is usually described as fear, or apprehension, or concern, in the sense that we have to recognize that our own condition is of being in a state of peril, that we are vulnerable to various kinds of suffering. And that suffering is something that we may not directly, in the case of the lower realms, rebirth in the lower realms, we may not actually be currently experiencing, but if we believe in the doctrine of karma and we learn about that, then and we understand our own nature and how karma is accumulated, that it's not only accumulated in this life, and that we possess many of the conditions that would force us to be reborn in the lower realms, then we should gain a sense of apprehension that the only thing that separates us from those lower realms is the fact that our life has not yet ended. And so there should be some urgency, a sense of urgency that peril is very real. And that we, on our own, by our own lack of skill in our current condition, are very likely to face that result. So it's only if we avail ourselves of the three Ratnas, and the Dharma Ratna in particular, that we have any hope of being able to escape that consequence. That fear is a strong motivator in a positive sense, because the avoidance of suffering, desire to avoid suffering, is an immense impulse, instinct. We can put it to proper use in the Dharma.
That is it. That is
So these are all useful points that relate to the act of taking refuge.
That is should be. That is. That comes to be kept at and be kept Chavas until Louis Chidinchi. Major, Jigan Jelly, Chen meet of others, Bendy, Deltoman, or that the and be kept Chavas.
Verse 20, the next verse, makes a distinction among the three Ratnas between those that are ultimate forms of an ultimate form of refuge and those which are not.
That is that is 최디 군들이 최군제인가 인사 최군제들이 니시 최는 니다 파베 조스디 최예부디 최라 농리 최다 도베 최니지 농리 최 민지 이리서 최진스 다디 농리 최 농리 니 최 최진스 랑게도 토바 탈도게 땡기 겹쳐 많이 데스 다 땡기 겹쳐 많이 데스 샴메게 두가 땡기 겹쳐 많이 놓으시야 다 그래야지 그걸로 그거야 아니 나 저저도 땡기 겹쳐 많이 데스 전단데 전바 무슨도 또 없이 털도게 제부 토바나 진다 랑이비 제부터에 털 내가 방을 잡아 도래시 방을 다 진다 다 진다 방을 잡아 방치해야지 농기 취해지 네 전다 몇개 말이스 그래서는 랑이 톱에 털도 마토 봐도 이 농기 취해 땡기리스 이 톱제 제부터 톱사스는 아니 진다서 그냥 추파를 개발라 두진을 지를 때는 그러와 두진 될 때는 추파를 들에 상을 두진이 다 돌기로 봐 뒤에서 진다 방을 잡아 이제 치르스 제를 다티 땡기 때문에 말이었어야 돼
So,
아니 된다 베껴서 랑게 그거 탈치 베껴들라 된다 베껴서 랑게 그거 탈만 치 베껴들라 군주 베껴지 that's
so not everyone has the verse, so maybe it would be useful to read a translation. It says, by virtue of being abandoned, by virtue of having a deceptive nature, by virtue of being non-existent, by virtue of being subject to fear, the Dharma and the Sangha constitute an ultimate form of refuge, do not constitute the highest refuge in the ultimate sense. Then the phrase highest refuge, means supreme ultimate refuge, means that the Dharma and the Sangha are not an object of refuge in the sense of representing the ultimate goal that you are seeking. In the case of the Dharma Ratna in particular, so the Dharma itself forms the scriptural Dharma and the Dharma of realization, or the Dharma of attainment. And that scriptural Dharma is a form of verbal expression, consists of words, meanings, conveyed with words. So that form of the Dharma is the means of providing the instruction that's needed to make spiritual progress. But then, as the verse says, ultimately, once they have served their purpose, then they are to be abandoned. They are, in fact, discarded. A famous metaphor for that is that they are like a raft. So the Dharma is the raft that one uses to cross the ocean of samsara. But once the other side is reached, then you no longer need the raft. So the Dharma serves its purpose, but it is a provisional purpose. It's not an end in itself.
the Rani Debu Rani the Project Rani Debu to the Debu to the touch, the grace. I think that found or I shall say, Rani Debu to the touch, the grace. Rani Debu to touch, Long Church, Rani Debu to the touch, the wish that I initiative. Sang Jenny. 아니 숨기 처지 거반에 되나리 유저를 숨기 처된 디제스 나 장도 지기를 봐.
However, we shouldn't misunderstand this statement. It doesn't mean that the Dharma is of no value once we achieve our own goal of enlightenment. So, more specifically, the Dharma is no longer needed by us once we have achieved our own enlightenment. But of course, as an enlightened being, our purpose is to help others. So the means of doing that is to convey the Dharma to them. But to attain, once that ultimate goal, which is the fulfillment of our own personal aim, has been reached, and the Dharma is needed with regard to that goal.
다음에 루의 주전 첼시를 장조 생각하게 기기다 돈 무슨 부족해 남게지 이 아니 내가 이렇게 말했지 마인드 아니 루의 주전인 게 첼시 라니 지마타다 가르쳐 그래. 랑 너무나 라니 지마타다디 다바 내자 랑기 모르 지마타다디 만나. 라니 저지. 라니 지마타다 배워야 말. 이래야 똥순도 또 나무로 지마타다 배워지 나와라. 그것도 나와 놓으래 봐. 지마타다 배워 나와. 이게 동영상도 그래. 남대지. 지금 사다때 제야말 상기도 같은데도 같은데 시티 반주로 봐. 어다지 루에 주제치를 슬루스도 매된 거죠. 그 나오다 매된 거. 그 나무라 지금 사다 저 나오지. 얘는 지금 사다 맞아요. 루에 주제인 게 제랬어.
So I mean, in a sense, if you take the words of the verse, at first blush, it should be startling, right? To say the Dharma is something to be abandoned, that seems heresy. Then the second point is it's deceptive, and that is in reference to the truth of the path. How can that be? How can the Arya's realization of ultimate truth be deceptive? Then Luechichen means it deceives you in that it appears a certain way, but that is not the way it actually is. So it's false in that way, or deceptive in that way. So how is the truth of the path, Mahayana truth of the path, deceptive? It's deceptive in the sense that when the Arya, Mahayana Arya, non-Buddha Mahayana Arya, is one-pointedly focused on emptiness and perceiving it directly, that state of mind, the awareness is one in which there appear to be no stains. You're perceiving ultimate truth. Ultimate truth is a quality of purity associated with it. So in that sense, there is the appearance of the absence of any stains. However, for the Mahayana Arya who is not a Buddha, has a temporary state. And once that state is over, and one emerges from that meditative state, in fact, stains still remain. So that realization is deceptive in this specialized way. It, in and of itself, is not the ultimate refuge. That is your goal. Because it does not represent the termination of all obstacles. Even though in that state, it appears as though the obstacles no longer exist.
That is. Kedakin DJ Shanantamingi Sanje Sanje Panjulu Chiji Nature said that Nyamambata, never done the join this. Driving the future, honey yanke, honey yanke, and yanke, to him, Norishi, the Mishi churches, start, Norishi, Yaran beauty to bring Norishi, the Mishi churches.
I made it right.
They Norishi machines.
Oh, the good stuff. Facciamo pezzo per c'è le deodore. Quindi alle
the greedy young bit,
non lo so.
youngest did and youngest, young mother said.
No.
Person in Bangala. He, then became a risk, Karesne, Mays, the Nimbo never than the join.
Then the word is absence. I mean non-existence. It's because it doesn't. It's really not. It doesn't mean non-existence. It means absence, because it is an absence, a mere absence. And the absence is what's represented by the truth of cessation, in particular. Truth of cessation is the elimination of the mental friction, and in the case of the Mahayana path, also the obstacles to omissions. But in this case, in particular, it's referring to the truth of cessation, the ultimate truth of cessation that exists in the mind of a Hinayana Arhat. And that ultimate cessation is nirvana. The nirvana of the Hinayana Arhat is that final truth of cessation in which all the mental friction seeds have been destroyed, that condition, that state. That state is a mere absence. An absence of the mental frictions. And that is not the ultimate goal that the Mahayana seeks.
I think Jita said the Niran Tajum of France, and Jiti Niran Tajum, young deity, and the young deity. Tani, Niran Tajum the Chili, and then become my she did it, but the church.
Then the Sangha, in the case of the Sangha Ratna, in particular, the Hinayana Sangha Ratna, which consists of the Hinayana Arhats. Those Hinayana Arhats are still subject to fear. They have a form of trepidation, which relates to the fact that they still possess the subtle obstacles to omniscience.
That is
No.
that is the make up the village photos and Thadu Sangi make up. When the make up said the time to make up. Sinjay beauty. I give it up. Japangalo. When the make up. Time to make up and Yarba.
No. Sure, don't give it away.
I said, that's a trade to get Yarba. Sangi Yarba.
What is it?
That's Sanjay beauty. Trade in you.
Ale.
All to Kanga.
San Margere, Sanjinki, Guti, So I put it another way. The Dharma Ratna and the Sangha Ratna exist in the Buddha as well. But when we say that the Sangha Ratna and the Dharma Ratna are not the ultimate form of refuge, we need to qualify that and say the Sangha Ratna and the Dharma Ratna, which are in the mind of a sentient being. The word sentient being being a term that excludes Buddhas. In Tibetan language, a Buddha is not a sentient being. The word sattva, not what the word sentient being means in English, in the sense of being having mind, but in the sense it means by definition a non-Buddha. So therefore, the Dharma Ratna and the Sangha Ratna, forms of it that are present in a non-Buddha, are not the ultimate form of refuge. It should be understood that way. The previous word.
당에도 들어와요. 때문에 상경이 지인스. 아니 두번 취기 무진 체스. 다다데 땡을. 당게디 담에도 상계 군주티. 연단 밑에인데. 주부터도 버쟁이 체스. 다디.
So the next verse, verse 21, it says, from the ultimate standpoint, or in the ultimate sense, Buddhahood alone, Buddhahood exclusively, is the refuge for the world. That's the first half of the verse. And then the second half of the verse gives the reasons why Buddhahood represents the ultimate refuge for everyone. Because the sage, meaning a Buddha, because the sage possesses Dharma. I use the word body in the sense of like a physical body, but it's a reference to the Dharmakaya. And using in the word Dharmakaya is the word Dharma. And his Dharmakaya is the ultimate form of Dharma. Right? And because he is the supreme, what does it say here? Because that is the perfection of the community. So then within the community, within the Sangha, that Buddhahood represents the perfection of the community, of the Sangha.
초장이 더도 제시들 사주를 사주탕에 사주탕만을 내려 전주 생각이 내체스네 사주탕을 내 제기 전주 생각 도수 아니 죽을 디 탈도가 잘리스 로아리스 죽을 토베 로아리스 토장이 더도 제시.
So all the community below Buddhahood, from the 10th stage Bodhisattva, who is on the verge of becoming enlightened, down to and including all of the remaining Mahayana Aryas, and all of them have not yet reached their perfection. The perfection being that Dharmakaya, which only the Buddha has, that perfection of the Dharma, and however he has. And so in that sense, the Buddha has attained that perfection, and so that is why he alone represents the ultimate form of refuge.
kuncho se di Ling che Ling di te ta pe kun che bre ta ni ke yong an che ti mi che tun de che da yin yu che na chung yi che duwa mi che kuncho ni sa yin yu de ku kuncho ta tun de ta ni ti che.
Next verse, verse 22, describes the meaning of the word Ratna. Why are the Buddha and the Dharma and the Sangha described as jewels? Why are they the jewel Buddha jewel, the Dharma jewel, and the Sangha jewel. So it says they are jewels because their appearance is rare. Huh? Their appearance is rare, difficult to obtain, also rare. Then they are free of stains. There's a purity to them, as precious gems have a clarity and purity to them. They have a power. That's interesting because in Indian culture, jewels are thought to have some innate beneficial quality. There's their power. And then because they are an ornament for the world, and the jewels also are thought of as ornamental, beautifying the world. And then also because they are the highest beings, and because they are unalterable in nature.
That is really Sutra.
So these six reasons and these six correspondence or parallels between ordinary jewels and the three Ratnas represent why the three Ratnas are called jewels. The verse will be explained in a little bit in the afternoon session. So with the remaining time, bring on your questions.
Okay.
Good.
So yesterday there was a discussion that mentioned the goals for ourselves and the goals for others. And is there one of them which is superior to the other, or are they on the same level?
Important. Yeah. Kesa nangya ani rangren da shinren ki tikne chitu rangren sin de rangren thatu shinren sin that turn ni nangne that di turn di ni nangne chik yala re chik thor re chik sa chewa re chik da janyam re sa che chun janyam re
oh 근데 랑두 kudan shendu ku sing chari 랑두 kudan shendu ku sing ta shendu jibar chire tando shendu ku dita subingi tire 근데 뒤져라 무엇을 남들 나니지 그니가 저렇지 근데 랑두 ku 세디다 추부들이 추부들이 이 주제 된 지리야지 주부지 주장은 스나네 주제 된 지리야 말이야.
주제 된 지리야 말이야.
아니.
된 지리야.
지리야 말이야.
아니 지리야 말이야.
주부들이.
아니 주부들이 난게요.
수분이부터 주장은 스나네 지리야 봐. 다 지리기 제가 제일 무슨 지리. Ramji Chubudan, Shindu Sumi, Sitan, Fando Kebameres.
Well, so those terms are kind of very, wide-ranging in their application. So that which is one's own aim and that which is the aim that relates to others. Then Buddhahood is, in a way, defined as the perfection of both aims. And among the two, then, the Dharmakaya is identified as the perfection of one's own aim. And the Rupakaya, which has two physical forms, the Sambhogakaya and the Nirmanakaya, are the perfection of the aims that relate to others. So if we're talking about the ultimate form of what relates to oneself and the ultimate form that relates to others, they are equivalent. They are, one is not more important than the other. Their role is different. So the Dharmakaya is something which cannot, in and of itself, benefit others, because it cannot be perceived by others. It is not evident to others. What is evident to others is the Rupakaya. So the Rupakaya is the means by which the Dharmakaya acts on behalf of others. But it does not appear to other beings. Yeah. On the other hand, when we think of your own, the aims that relate to yourself, definition, that means only one, you, yourself. You say the aims that relate to others, it's much more wide-ranging, much more inclusive of great number of beings. One does not want to limit one's concerns to oneself. One wants to extend one's concern to others as well. There's much that can be said about these two terms, but generally speaking, the difference between oneself and others is like the difference between the earth and the sky. You are one finite thing. Sky is unlimited.
Yeah, that, yeah.
My question is from yesterday when Rinpoche was talking about self-existence, and it's really important to understand the nature of self-existence and how to and how to work with it. So my question is, at this my level of understanding, where of course emptiness is ultimately the antidote, but at this level, like how to work with it or make a dent in the appearance of self-existence.
Kesa기 전에 가서 그때는 되는데 그때 이제 가서 갑자기 같은 일면으로 시랍동반이지 그런 게 있으니까 주가 각자님 받는 매바님 받는 아니 방자님 받는 리페 각자 아니 동인지 동조인 받는 아니 저쪽에 개체모래 이 고안에 어떤 아니 그래서 아니 이 나는 솔직히 지도지 원한지 버렸어. 그래서 나는 저기 내가 뭐하게 아니 디 콜이야 아니 그거 저기 랑싱이 주바 알코올 틱 코라랑 게 일단 유버설치 뭐 시작하는 데는 개점 수준에서 제가 안에 딜레 또 서치 아니 고아티 또 고아니야서 아니 간절치니 사발도 나랑도 지치단 게 아니 다발식이 내가 이만 이제 제고야 일단 제네 아니 그래서 각자당 아니 열심히 매워하는데 사무 캐다 간절치 그렇게 해서
야 다티 나중에 나는 이제 좀 봐. 내가 나시니 내 수수 나를 차비나 난 세야지 나들로 나 이제 제 주스를 짓는 게 그렇지 딱 하다가 진료되는 수생이 따버려 수다 생이다 다시 나 사람 공부다 수생이를 따버려 그래 나디 그것도 수비된 두개 다 째지네 생기된 두개 다 째잖아 그렇잖아 때문에 그렇지 이래야 그 수생이 처벌을 때니 이해가 아니 처벌 뒤에 다 째가지는 내봐 어디 디디치 사태를 랑을 내가 하시게 이내야 나는 좀 그냥 시야가 왜냐면 니는 미미디 너라 바이스 를 바자 세월 세를 나는 좀 해봐 니는 미미디 아니 제가 치면 믿어봐 만약에 얘는 믿지 집어요 아니 얘는 믿지 집고 좋아 얘는 믿지래 믿지 아니 굉장히 자원 많지야 얘는 믿지 알아도 가부채서 얘는 믿지 이수나 뒤라를 대화때 얘는 믿는 게 대화인 거야
라파
나
라파 체크 로파 체크
디 라나 가부채서게 가부채야기 미치 수나 미는
네.
이게 미는 게 수가 되게 이 미티 미는 가부채서 미는 미티 내가 지었으나 동네 핑계 동네계를 지도가 이나 신난 소리지 미는 미티 난 좀 봐. 이나는 나는 이 타는 좀 지미시지 유진의 내내양 자와티 제투야. 자와티 제투야지 가리 자와지 자와 테러가 테러지 제투야. 그래서 아무리 내세야 돼 지단 길에 있어. 디나시 나코란 제제 디스 에버나시다. 디나시 누구 간거로 파제 제가 치나 긴규면이 마다 맞게 됐지나 이해봐. 이해지다. 랑을 매장 유세야 돼 딜이.
So there were sort of two lines of thought that were presented. One is that we can take the analysis and apply it to anything and everything. But if we start with ourselves, our own individual selves, the nature of our individuality, the nature of our personal self is such that when it presents itself to our minds, each one of us, it has such a quality to it, the appearance of substantiality to it, that, so if it were a physical thing, you could actually touch it. If you reached out, it's really there. So that's kind of the starting point of our experience, our ordinary experience. So given that, then if we don't take that the way it is and just assume it to be true, if we try to investigate what that substantiality consists of, that seems to be there, then in short, or the result will be that we find nothing. So there isn't anything actually there. It doesn't say it doesn't exist. It doesn't mean the self is non-existent. It means if it is self-existent, then it means exists in and of itself, exists on its own, independently of our perception of it, which is the way that it seems to be. Then we have to be able to identify what that quality is, or where that what that consists of. So if we think of our individual selves, the only way that we generate a sense of self is in relation to our body and or our mind. So it appears with that. So therefore, if it is real, if it does exist on its own, then we have to be able to identify it within that complex. And so then the proper analysis is meant to determine there is no such basis. So to use a philosophical language, is saying the mind and the body are the basis of ascription. It means they're the element of experience. We have a sense of our physicality, we have a sense of our mental. Through those experiences, that a sense of self emerges. So they are the basis in relation to which the sense of self shows itself. Then the question is whether that sense of self that appears to be something that actually sits there for us to see is actually there on its own or not. So the analysis is meant to determine there is no such thing that actually sits there. It's something which the mind, by virtue of other experiences, conjures up, so to speak. And so that's kind of what we need to. So the thing is to recognize that the starting point, the unanalyzed starting point, is that things, including ourselves, definitely appear as though they actually have some independent mode of being, such that if you closed your eyes and you reached out, it would be there. That kind of sense. That's a starting point. And then the thing is to verify that or to refute that. And then the second line of thought which he gave was, and so the point at which you reach correct understanding that thing is not self-existent is that that's an illusion. The sense of being there is an illusion. And then the second line that he very much presented was that it's like the person that you perceive in a dream. So everybody knows when you wake up that the person that you dreamed of in your dream was not real. So we can say, well, how does it happen? Well, in the scriptural sense, we have some seeds of awareness that exist in our being, and while we're sleeping, they awaken, and then we have these dream perceptions of people. And if we dream of someone that we know, for instance, somebody that we like, then in that dream we experience joy or happiness. Oh, this is my friend, right? Or if it's the opposite, we can have an emotional response to that fictitious dream object. So even though it is an unreal thing, it is still efficacious. It still can affect us. And so all ordinary phenomena are just like that. They are not real. They are not self-existent, but that does not mean they are non-existent, and that does not mean that they are not able to have an effect on the world in general. So the ability to marry those two ideas, unreal yet efficacious, that is really the challenge. Then another phrase is saying its existence, to the extent that we accept it as being existent, is in an unanalyzed sense. Taking experience as it presents itself to us without examining it, in that sense, things exist. But it's when we undertake some form of analysis, then we determine they don't exist at all independently. And those two things are, one does not nullify the other. That's very important.
That's the Rangun American Rana Yapata. If that's how she Mati Ran Naya Mati Takados, and my identity. Any she not been Rangun American love it. Among us, it contains name for some Lola. And people. Ling will Nasi Naya. What those are such a chen? That's such a to do. Handsome everty. Yarba. What in it did Raman and Baba City? Nanju Tarki. Say, say, into never. What did it? I'm putting my thing. She never did.
So the essence of the answer was that while this analysis applies to everything, the most convenient way and the most practical way is to start with yourself. And the process begins not with the analysis itself, but with a form of introspection in which you must identify precisely how it is that the self appears to be self-existent. What does that mean, to appear to be self-existent? You have to examine your own experience, your sense of self, and what it is about how that self presents itself that represents its self-existence. What is it about the way we perceive ourselves that we will say is for the self to appear to be self-existent? We have to start with that. Once that has, and that's a process of its own that has an endpoint. Once that has been determined, then the question arises, well, is it in fact the way it appears to be? Is it in fact self-existent? And then the analysis has a certain, procedure, steps to it, which if carried out effectively, successfully, properly, will determine it is not possible to be self-existent the way it seems to be. So there is no self-existent self there, even though that's the way it appears. And yet, that's not to say that it doesn't exist.
Mm.